Well, if you were here last week, you'll know that we started Advent a week early because we are so busy, there are so many things to fit in that we had to take an extra Sunday to get started. And so that will give you a wee clue that this Advent we are going to do things slightly differently. You'll notice, for example, that today's reading was not one that's particularly commonly read at this time of year. And what we're doing is we're thinking about this whole idea of Emmanuel, God with us. What does that mean for us? What does it mean for the world that God is with us? What does it mean to be fully present where we are and in what we're doing? Even now, I suspect there might be somebody thinking, lunch. What are we having for lunch? You know, we need to be fully present in the moment. Because we are conscious that at this time of year, it's very easy to become overwhelmed. There are so many things to do, so many last-minute bits and pieces that it just sometimes can get too much for us. Last week we thought about that and about the fact that we simply can't deal with every problem, every issue that there is in the world. It's too much for us. And we're constantly bombarded with these pictures of things that were happening. For example, on Friday night when the helicopter crashed, instantly it was on Twitter and Facebook and then in the news. And we've had constant updates ever since. But what we thought about was the fact that while we can't solve every problem in the world, what we can do is we can do for one what we wish we could do for everyone. Today, we are thinking about... We're one forward, by the way. No. You're one forward to me. Now you're two forward. Because now we're coming to travel. Okay. See. Is this really buzzing this morning? Is it just me? Can you turn these speakers down? Because I'm getting a... Thank you. So, today we're thinking about opportunity that we might miss because we're so busy, because there's so many things on, because of all the complexities of life. And one of the things that struck me this week was how many of the Bible stories that we read involve travel. If you think about it, right from the very beginning, Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden to wander the world. They became nomads. They were travelers. Then you get Abraham, who's sent on a journey to, well, goodness only knows where, quite literally, because he had no idea, but God said, just go and I'll tell you when you get there. And all the way through the Bible, there's journeys. The Israelites, we know, went on a great big long journey and they got lost and they got it wrong and they wandered in the desert for 40 years. But even then, when they got into the promised land, there was time when they were taken into exile and had to come back, and they were in exile and had to come back. It's constant wandering and travel. And then when you get into the sort of famous people, I suppose, Noah floated around in a big boat. Joseph is taken down to Egypt. Jonah gets thrown from the boat and swallowed by a fish and taken to the place that he was running away from in the first place. And in the New Testament, what happens is that the journeys continue because Jesus travels all around the area. And then the disciples and the church spread because Paul goes on missionary journeys and people travel with the gospel. For Advent, we would read stories of Mary and Joseph and their journey to Bethlehem, of Mary's journey to see Elizabeth, and then of their journey down into Egypt to escape from the king. And you know, we're used to travelling, particularly nowadays. We're used to getting into the car or onto the bus or the train. We go for long journeys or short journeys. We go for holidays. We go for fun. We go for work. We're used to travelling. In fact, next summer, some of the folk from the congregation are heading out to Arizona. And there's a number of reasons for that, a number of reasons why we're going. You'll know that if you're part of this congregation, you'll know that we had a visit from some young people from America. And while they were here, they invited us to go back out there. But also there's an existing link with a congregation in Arizona. Despite what you might imagine, there is a need for mission. There is a need for the gospel in Arizona, just as there is in Scotland and in Prestwick. People need to hear the good news. It's an opportunity to build relationships with new people, to learn from them, to share experience and to learn and to grow. It's an opportunity for the team to build relationships with each other. And it's in doing that and working together that we find that some of the sharp edges that we have get knocked off. And we become the kind of more rounded living stones that Peter talks about. And you know, it's good to have a project to work at, to grow into. It sharpens our skills through practical experience of doing things. It's not a holiday. And if you're one of the ones who are going, I want to just reiterate that. It's not a holiday. We're going to be leading worship and Bible studies. We're going to be doing, hopefully, a holiday club. We're going to be helping to feed people at a soup kitchen, sharing our own stories and experience with our brothers and sisters in the Navajo reservation. And that is a real encouragement to them. They struggle with life. You know the way that their land is there's so many similarities with Scottish history. With the way land was divided up, with people having a wee croft and having to stay on it, and then with the Highland clearances, that's a history that is shared in a sense, because they have effectively little crofts, and if they leave the little croft, then somebody else takes it over, and you don't have any land anymore. So that's meant that it's really difficult to improve things. So many of them are living with no running water and no toilets. This is in America. And then at the turn of the sort of late 18, early 1900s, they were evicted from their land. And they were taken hundreds of miles away over towards Mexico. Even as late as the 1960s, children were taken down the 3.5-hour drive to Phoenix, and they were put up in a hostel. And it's very important for Navajo men to have long hair. And the first thing they did was cut it off. And they gave them American names. And they weren't allowed to speak Navajo. It's all very familiar to those of us who are Scottish, because that's part of our history as a nation. When you couldn't wear a kilt, when you couldn't speak Gaelic, when you couldn't live in your land because a landlord wanted to have sheep, and you were less valuable than the sheep. So there's a real connection, a real bond somehow that's involved in all of that with these folk. And for them to know that somebody is interested enough to go is deeply significant. So it's not a holiday. I know it's expensive, but the experience that's gained, that's then brought back into this congregation and this community, I hope will be of real benefit to us for years to come. Somebody asked why we don't just stay in Scotland. That's a perfectly reasonable and valid question, because Scotland needs mission. But you know, the folk who are going are involved already in outreach in Scotland. They're involved in mission in Scotland. Volunteering at the Ark, Wheels in Motion, and the Soup Bush, doing stuff with Scripture Union and Friends International, and Tear Fund. people who are active in their congregations and involved in the life of the church. So this is an opportunity to develop faith and experience in a different context and a different culture. It's part of life's journey for those who will go. And our life is like a journey. That's just the case. We are at different places in our faith journey, each of us. But these journeys that we take, like the disciples on the road to Emmaus or the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus, can be transformed in a totally unique and amazing way by having a moment when we meet God. And each of us really should be looking for moments when we meet God and recognize that Christ is journeying with us. He's beside us, supporting us, guiding us, encouraging us, holding us. And so to appreciate the presence of God in our lives, we have to realize that journeys are not just about getting somewhere. It's like the difference between traveling using a road atlas or sat-nav and an ordnance survey map. The ordnance survey map shows you lots of detail. It shows you lots of things that there are in your area, the forests and the lakes and the disused mines and the ruined castles and the picnic area and the viewpoint and all of that kind of stuff. But a road atlas doesn't do that because it's not interested in that. It's about getting from here to there. It doesn't matter what's in between because it's about roads. Now, see, that's me. When I get in the car, I don't like stopping. See, when we used to live in Thurso and Inverness, it used to drive me daft. I would spend all this time trying to overtake this lorry, and you would no sooner get past it than the wee voice in the back would go, "I need the toilet." Right? Well, I'm not stopping. Right? I don't do stopping. But you know what? You miss out so much. And see the difference between driving and just being a passenger. When you can take time to look around and see what's there that you don't see when you're driving, because when you're driving you're concentrating on the other traffic and on the road. Life's a bit like that. Many of us really, I suspect, are the same. We approach our journeys like that. We obsess about the destination. We ignore everything that's on round about it. The countryside, the wildlife, the beautiful village that we've passed through, the music even playing on the radio, the conversation of those who are traveling with us. By contrast, when people used to travel in the past, the journey itself was often as important as the destination. To the pilgrims in Geoffrey Chaucer's 14th century book, The Canterbury Tales, the end point was secondary to the stories that they told each other on the way. After all, tales is the operative word in the title. Do you know, Chaucer doesn't even record the fact that they arrived at Canterbury, because that's not what's important. What's important is the journeying, the learning, the growing, the telling of story with each other. Too frequently today we jump into our cars and we are on autopilot until we get to where we're going. You can travel for miles without actually noticing what's going on really round about you. And if we live our lives like road atlases or sat-navs, regarding life as a series of just journeys from A to B, then we will miss truly experiencing life. Whatever our achievement-based society tells us, life is not just about getting somewhere. Rather, life should be about finding glimpses of Jesus in our everyday travels. The Christmas stories start with a number of journeys. But we shouldn't forget that the story didn't finish in Bethlehem or even in Egypt. It didn't finish at that point. It didn't even finish on the cross at Calvary. The journey continues every day as we meet with Jesus, as we go through life, as we travel with him, as we live lives that are centered on experiencing him and sharing his love. After all, the kingdom of God is not just about some future hope, pie in the sky when you die kind of thing. It's about now. It's about being here now. Emmanuel, God with us, everywhere and every day, in the midst of our journeys. Paul, on his own missionary travels, would remind his listeners and readers that God was to be found among them. So our job is to enter his kingdom each day by recognizing his fingerprints on things around us. In nature, in laughter, in kindness, in love, in children, in art, in music, in family and in friends, in food, in sunshine, in a smile or a hug. These are the places that we find Jesus. I don't know how many of those moments I've missed in my life. It's not like a DVD player that there's a rewind button and you can go back and look for them. Once they're gone, they're gone. And we assume then that they've not happened. But it's so important that we take time to recognize God in our lives. The Russian mystic and author Leo Tolstoy once said this: "In the name of God, stop for a moment. Cease your work and look around you." The Bible contains many titles for God, but the one name that God gives himself is deeply significant. For the Hebrews, for the Israelites, the name of God was so holy, it was so revered that they would never write it down, they would never say it, they never pronounce it. They had to use a kind of code that comes to us in what we call the divine tetragrammaton. And it's those letters YHWH. They took the vowel sounds out of it because they wouldn't say it. It was so special, the name of God. And we first see it in Exodus chapter 3. And Moses is in the wilderness and he sees a bush burning and he goes over and God speaks to him from the bush and says, "Take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground." And he then calls him into this work that he has for him. And Moses is really uncertain about it all. You see, we tend to think that God made Moses wait for 40 years tending sheep in the wilderness in preparation for the 40 years that he would then lead the children of Israel in the wilderness. But what if it was because Moses wasn't listening? What if God had been trying again and again and again to break through to him and he never listened? And this is the first time 40 years later that he's actually stopped and thought, wow, I'm going to go and see what that is. And he lets God break through. In those days, every nation had their own God. And so God identifies himself to Moses as the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but that's a bit outdated because Jacob's been dead for 400 years. So when Moses is told to go, he says, well, who am I going to say has sent me? Who are you? What God really are you? And the answer that God gives is, tell them my name. Tell them you speak for Yahweh. Yahweh means I am. And, we kind of struggle with that. We're not really sure what to do with the name I am. But Moses knew. He understood that this was God saying, I am in this moment. I am here now. I am the God of this day, of this crisis, of this opportunity, of this miracle. I am. In Exodus chapter 6, Moses tells God that he's not clever enough, he's not young enough, he's not strong enough, he's not tough enough. And every time God simply replies, I am. The first word of Psalm 23 in Hebrew is not the article the, nor is it the word Adonai, which we would translate Lord. It's neither of those. David, in sharing the secret of his life, of his leadership, of his work, starts it with this: Yahweh. I am is my shepherd. I shall not want. I will fear no evil because he is. And I want to tell you that he still is. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He's bigger than the recession. He's the owner of the cattle on 1,000 hills. He's the healer of diseases. If you are lost, he is the way. If you are struggling in life, he is your help. If you are in darkness, he is the light of the world. If you are sad, he is joy to the world. And he is here now, and don't miss it. Don't let the moment go by, because he wants to speak to you. He wants to be with you because he loves you. In that story that we read today, David is just in a dreadful situation. His property has gone, his family has gone, his life is in danger because his men are distraught and they're threatening to kill him. There seemed for him to be no hope. Here was a moment that David could have missed. And he would have justified it by saying that he was busy. He had other things to think about. There were things in his mind. Do you know, nothing will make us miss God more than worry. We worry about so many things. And what does David say? I am is my shepherd. I don't need to fear anything because he is. There comes a point when you know all that you can know about a situation, and you've done all you can do about it. And then there comes a point when, in the name of God, to stop for a moment, cease your work, and you might just find a burning bush. My prayer for you this season is that God will give you eyes to see things in a new light, in a new way, and that you'll seize the moment. Amen.